Friday afternoon, regular working hours in the corporate heart of Lisbon. At the top of a modern skyscraper, the millionaire Ricardo Valença gathered his employees and declared coldly, "Starting today, no one leaves work for prayers. Whoever insists is fired." Some Muslim workers lowered their heads in silence, holding back the sting of humiliation. A few minutes later, when the adhan echoed softly from the Martim Moniz area, the impossible happened. The building lights flickered. All the computers shut down at the same time, and the internal cameras captured a white light moving on its own through the empty hallways, as if something were roaming the building searching for the ones who had been wronged. The system collapsed within seconds. Panic spread through the staff, and all of Lisbon was left with a single question. Was it just a malfunction, or an answer no one dared to ignore? Before continuing, check if you're already subscribed and tell in the comments which city you're watching from. Ricardo's company operated like a microcosm of modern Lisbon: diversity, mixed accents, overlapping cultures. In the hallways, you could hear Darija, Creole, Urdu, European Portuguese, and even classical Arabic during a break. The team included workers from Guinea-Bissau, Morocco, Mozambique, Pakistan, and a few Portuguese who had reverted to Islam. Despite the differences, everyone deeply respected Imran Saidi, a 70-year-old Moroccan who had lived in the country for 4 decades. Imran was discreet, punctual, and known for never raising his voice. He stored his prayer rug with care and always used his lunch break to perform his salah in a simple corner of the warehouse, a spot where the skylight cast a soft glow, creating an almost spiritual atmosphere. Many colleagues approached him for advice, calling him Uncle Imran, even without any family connection. But Imran's presence and the serenity he carried contrasted sharply with the explosive temperament of the company owner. Surrounded by luxury and power, Ricardo no longer hid the intolerance he harbored. For months he had been complaining about spiritual breaks, claiming loss of productivity. That week, however, something changed. Arrogance took the shape of a decree. Anyone who stops to pray during work hours is out. I don't want outdated traditions inside my building. The silence that followed was suffocating. Employees exchanged looks of anger and fear. Some tried to argue, speaking of rights and religious freedom, but Ricardo ignored every word. The decision was final. When Friday approached, the air grew heavier. In elevators and meeting rooms, the topic was the same. What would Jumu'ah be like in such a hostile environment? Some thought about leaving early. Others feared for their livelihood. Imran, however, remained calm as always, as if he knew that no injustice goes unanswered. And in that building in the center of Lisbon, everyone sensed, even if they couldn't explain, that something was about to happen. Ricardo's building, located in the Saldanha area, was a showcase of technology and ostentation. Mirrored glass reflected the city's movement, automatic doors slid silently, and the interior was kept cold by constant air conditioning, so chilly that many employees wore jackets even in the summer. Cameras were installed in every hallway, every meeting room, and even inside the elevators. Ricardo believed surveillance was synonymous with absolute control. That Friday, before noon, he gathered everyone in the main room. The speech came dry, harsh, calculated to crush any chance of resistance. Today, no one leaves their desk for prayers, traditions, or anything else. Are we clear? Silence fell immediately. Some lowered their gaze, others swallowed their frustration. There was fear, but also indignation. People who had worked there for years felt a knot in their chest, as if something sacred was being ripped away. It was more than an unfair order. It was a direct attack on dignity. Near the window, Imran observed the room with his usual serenity. The wrinkles marked decades of effort, and his dark eyes held stories of faith that had crossed borders. He didn't answer the owner. He simply closed his hand inside his pocket, touching the tasbih he had carried since youth, a simple object that reminded him to keep his heart steady. Each bead between his fingers seemed to hold a silent supplication. The digital clock on the wall moved slowly toward Jumu'ah time. The red numbers pulsed like an inevitable reminder, almost provoking. Tension grew in waves, in the computers, in the headphones, in the muffled sound of keys being pressed faster than usual. Outside, Lisbon's rhythm continued, electric, hurried, indifferent to the internal turmoil of that office. But inside, the air felt heavier. The hum of the vents faltered. The glow of the LED panels dimmed for a second. Nothing that could officially be called a failure, but enough for a few to raise their eyebrows alert. The Muslim employees exchanged uneasy glances. not daring to move. Among them, a young Pakistani sent a message to his brother with only one short sentence: "Something feels strange here today." Another, from Guinea-Bissau, took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Then the lighting system flickered for the first time. Not a simple flicker, but a pulse, as if the entire building were holding its breath. The sound of the air conditioning wavered. The monitor on Ricardo's desk froze for half a second before resuming. Imran slowly lifted his face. His eyes rose to the ceiling, an almost instinctive gesture, like someone recognizing what others could not perceive. Something was beginning, and although no one could explain it, everyone felt it. The glass-lined hallways reflected the white, early afternoon light as 3 employees decided to move in absolute silence. Imran walked ahead, short steps, calm posture. Behind him, 2 colleagues, a young Mozambican and a Moroccan technician, moved carefully, trying not to draw attention. Their plan was simple: go down to the courtyard, perform a quick prayer, and return before Ricardo noticed. But the magnate had eyes everywhere. As soon as the stairwell door was pushed open, a sharp voice echoed through the corridor. "Where do you think you're going?" The 3 froze. Imran turned slowly, maintaining composed expression. Ricardo advanced across the polished floor, firm steps, jaw tight. His eyes carried a mix of wounded authority and contained fury. "One more step and you're all fired. I won't say it again." The Mozambican lowered his head. The technician clenched his fingers nervously. Imran, however, showed no fear. He took a deep breath and responded in a respectful tone that contrasted with the charged atmosphere. "We don't want to disrespect you. It's only 5 minutes. We'll be right back." The attempt at conciliation only fueled the businessman's anger. Ricardo's hand grabbed Imran's shirt, pulling him roughly closer. The fabric strained under the force. The elderly man staggered slightly but kept his dignity. He didn't raise his voice. There was no confrontation, only a calm, almost paternal gaze that irritated the aggressor even more. "I'm the one in charge here, and I'm going to prove it right now." The sentence had barely ended when the corridor lights flickered abruptly. A vibration ran through the ceiling panels like a contained tremor. The floor seemed to quiver beneath their feet, even though no equipment besides the essentials was running. The 3 employees exchanged incredulous looks. Ricardo stood still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. "What is this now?" Before anyone could form a response, the metal structure above them vibrated a second time, stronger. A sound like expanding steel echoed through the empty space. Something in the air had changed, colder, denser, almost tangible. Outside, coming from the direction of Martin Moniz, the Adhan crossed the street like a firm melody. The call echoed between buildings, drifting through open windows, filling the corridor with a resonance that seemed to contradict the arrogance of that environment. The employees felt the hair on their arms stand on end. The young Moroccan murmured something inaudible. Ricardo stiffened, trying to hide his discomfort. Imran lifted his face, closed his eyes for a moment, and remained in absolute silence, like someone who recognizes when the unseen decides to intervene. The staircase behind them was still half open, but no one dared to take the next step. The atmosphere had shifted and none of them could explain why. The tense silence suspended in the corridor didn't last long. As the Adhan echoed louder from the square, the building's internal camera system began recording something no technician would be able to explain later. In the security room monitor, a guard frowned at the screen. Suddenly, on the feed showing the 3rd-floor corridor, a white glow appeared moving across the space, not like a normal reflection, but like a presence moving with intention. It didn't blink, didn't waver, didn't dissolve. It was a continuous streak, dense, almost liquid, sliding through the air. "This isn't normal," the guard muttered, leaning closer to the screen. The light traveled across the floor, rose a few inches, and moved forward, as if inspecting every corner. On the upper floors, no one noticed anything yet, but on the 3rd floor, the environment was beginning to show signs that something unusual was about to happen. A sudden chill swept through the offices, cold, abrupt, impossible to justify in a fully sealed building. Open folders trembled on desks, loose pages lifted a few centimeters before falling again. Workers who remained seated glanced around, confused. "Did you feel that?" a bookkeeper asked the colleague beside her. "There's no draft here. None of this makes sense." The printers, silent until then, whirred to life abruptly. The rollers began spinning, pulling blank sheets without any command. One of them expelled 10 completely empty pages, one after another. The printer beside it repeated the same phenomenon, spitting out sheets as if triggered by an invisible force. The noise of the motors spread through the hallways, creating a spectral atmosphere in the building, as if the machines were reacting to something humans couldn't see. In the corner of the open space, a large screen that usually displayed charts and reports collapsed. The image vanished, replaced by pulsating blue static, almost hypnotic. Vertical lines rose and fell like uncontrolled waves. What is that? Network failure? Even if it were, it wouldn't cause this. No one could find an explanation. The electrical system was functional. The entire building had power. Nothing justified the sudden technological breakdown. Employees abandoned their desks, drawing closer to one another as they observed the environment with a mix of fear and fascination. There was something in the air, a weight, a vibration, that made even the most skeptical remain silent. The printers grew louder. The screen's static seemed to take on rhythm. The cold wind persisted, sweeping through rooms as if it had its own source. A senior manager approached the hallway glass, placed his hand on the surface, and immediately pulled back. It's freezing, like it's been outside for hours. But the building's climate system was stable, with no failures recorded. The shock only deepened the sense that the building was reacting to something none of them understood. Back in the security room, the white glow remained on the footage, moving slowly toward the elevators. The guard swallowed hard. I'm calling the supervisor." But even as he said it, the light on the corridor screen intensified, as if pulsing with the distant sound of the adhan that continued echoing outside. It was as though the entire building had awakened, watching, silent and attentive, each person inside it. The workers, motionless, felt it. This wasn't just technology failing, it was a sign. The next morning began with the building completely surrounded by curiosity and rumor. The incident had frightened workers, managers, and even Ricardo himself, who spent the night in absolute silence inside his office, reviewing records and trying to find a rational explanation. At 8 o'clock, a technical team from EDP arrived to conduct a full analysis. The specialists opened panels, dismantled electrical boards, and reviewed every circuit. They connected measuring devices, checked the network history from the previous 24 hours, and compared the building's consumption with the neighboring ones. After nearly 2 hours of inspection, the chief engineer looked at the others and said firmly, "There are no faults in the external grid." The report showed total stability. No fluctuations, no voltage spikes, no interruption in the electrical distribution of the street, the adjacent buildings, or the municipal system. It was as if the blackout had happened only there, isolated, targeted, almost personal. The team moved on to the structural part. They opened the false ceiling, analyzed beams, tested motion sensors, and examined the climate system. Everything was impeccable. No signs of wear, overload, leakage, or abnormal vibration. Zero structural damage, the second engineer confirmed, running a hand over the digital report. And zero overload, added the third, pointing to the stable graph on the tablet. Nothing justified it. When they reached the security room, they found 3 guards still perplexed in front of the screens. The technicians requested access to the internal camera recordings. They fast-forwarded the footage to the estimated time of the blackout. On the monitor, the third-floor corridor appeared clearly, and then at the exact moment Ricardo appeared in the frame, shoving Imran roughly, the glow appeared. A radiant band crossed the corridor, moving from one end to the other in a fluid, continuous, precise motion. There was no crack in the camera glass, no sunlight entering, no metallic surface reflecting. The recording was raw and direct. The image of the light remained stable, without the distortion typical of lens defects. The EDP engineer leaned closer to the screen, adjusted the color, and repeated in a lower voice as if speaking to himself, "This isn't a lens defect." The security supervisor took a deep breath, and it only appeared in that exact second. Before that, nothing. After that, it vanishes. The technicians rewound the footage. They repeated it several times, frame by frame. The brightness appeared only when Ricardo shoved Imran, like a shard of energy reacting to that specific act. It was impossible to ignore the coincidence. The more they analyzed it, the more evident it became that the glow had direction, its own behavior, and even seemed to look around the office, illuminating walls and objects as if it were alive. At 11:20 a.m., the video, already copied onto a flash drive, landed in the hands of an administrative employee. In less than half an hour, it had been sent to the team's internal WhatsApp group. "Guys, watch this now." Comments poured in. "What just crossed the corridor? I was on the 4th floor, felt a weird cold. That wasn't normal. Someone has to explain this. The file spread quickly, crossing the building's walls. It reached family members' phones, then community groups, and within hours it began circulating quietly through all of Lisbon. When Ricardo noticed the commotion, he rushed to the security room. The supervisor gestured for him to look at the screen. The glow passed before his eyes, again and again, harder to deny each time. He swallowed dryly. "Delete that," he ordered. But it was already too late. The recording had been released to the world, and what it showed would raise questions no engineer, no matter how experienced, could answer. The next morning, the 3rd-floor corridor, the one where Ricardo had most harshly forbidden prayer, became the center of an unexpected debate. IT technicians, security staff, and several employees began cross-checking data, reviewing electrical logs and internal building maps. What they discovered left everyone even more unsettled. While the engineers confirmed there had been no global failure, the electrical system map revealed a detail impossible to ignore. The blackout had affected only the floor where several Muslim employees usually prayed, and where the prohibition had been enforced with the greatest severity. Not a single lamp on the 2nd floor flickered. No monitor on the 4th floor shut down. No elevator jammed. Only the 3rd floor plunged into total darkness. The revelation spread quickly through the corridors. "How does only one floor drop if the grid is unified?" a technician asked. "This makes absolutely no sense," replied a colleague, frowning. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, a group of employees gathered around a laptop. They were watching the video in slow motion. Absolute silence filled the room as the brightness crossed the corridor for the 10th time. But when they slowed it down even further, something became clear. So clear it drew a collective gasp. The luminous streak moved continuously, just as before, but at a certain moment, it stopped. And it stopped exactly in front of Imran. No metallic reflection did that. No security lens was capable of producing such a perfectly fixed pause in a precise spot. The light remained still for a fraction of a second, as if observing the elderly man. Only then did it move forward and disappear at the end of the corridor. One employee brought her hand to her mouth. This can't be a coincidence. It's too mathematically perfect to be random," murmured another. "But a warning of what? For who?" a third asked, eyes wide. No one had an answer. The blinds vibrated softly, as if a gentle wind crossed the cafeteria, despite all the windows being closed. The atmosphere grew strangely dense. It wasn't fear, it was awareness. The idea that something unseen had responded to the injustice lingered among them. Imran walked quietly into the cafeteria. His posture was calm as always, but his eyes carried a trace of sadness. He didn't like confrontation. He didn't seek to prove anything. He only wanted to fulfill his spiritual duty in peace. When he saw the recording, he remained serene, simply inclining his head. "Allah knows what is hidden and what is revealed," he said gently. Even that soft sentence reverberated as if spoken in a large auditorium. A few people felt chills rise along their arms. Meanwhile, on the other side of the floor, Ricardo watched everything from behind the slightly open meeting room door. He was completely shaken. His arrogance seemed to have slipped through his fingers. His once proud gaze was now that of a man who had lost control over his own world. With each replay of the video, his heartbeat quickened. With every comment about the light stopping in front of Imran, the sweat on his forehead increased. "This isn't real," he thought. "It can't be. It's a trick, an edit." But deep down, he knew no one there had altered anything. He knew the recording came directly from the internal cameras. He knew it had happened right in front of him, even if he hadn't noticed at the time. The employees continued debating. Could it be static energy? Not at that intensity. Could it be interference? Interference doesn't follow people. Then someone said, almost in a whisper, "Maybe it's not something engineering can explain." Ricardo closed the door slowly, as if afraid of making noise. For the first time in his life, he felt that his power, his money, and his control meant nothing in the face of something greater, something that did not bend to internal decrees, to threats of dismissal, to shouted orders. And in that moment, completely alone in the dark room, he realized the light had not been an accident, and Imran was not just an ordinary employee. The world around them was about to change, and so was he. The next day, Ricardo's building felt different. It wasn't something visible to the naked eye, but everyone sensed a kind of quiet unease lingering in the hallways. Employees spoke in low tones, avoiding eye contact with the boss. There were rumors, exchanged messages, videos being sent to family and friends. The story had escaped all control. After an entire night without sleep, Ricardo made a difficult decision. He would call Imran. He needed to understand what had happened, even though he didn't know how to ask the question. At 3 in the afternoon, he sent a short message through his secretary. "Ask Mr. Imran to come to my office now." Minutes later, the elderly man walked in with slow steps, a humble posture, and a calm expression. The same calmness that had always irritated Ricardo, but now seemed necessary, almost comforting. The magnate remained standing, pacing from one side of the room to the other, visibly nervous. It was strange to see him like that. The man who always spoke with a firm voice, who never showed weakness, now looked like a teenager caught doing something wrong. Finally, he stopped in front of Imran. "Yesterday, in the corridor, I felt something behind me," he said, his voice trembling. "Something I can't explain." Imran didn't rush. He looked at him the way someone looks at a wounded person, not an enemy. He stepped a little closer and replied calmly, "Arrogance awakens what the eyes cannot reach. When a heart tries to extinguish the light of prayer, the unseen reminds us who truly holds power." Ricardo swallowed hard. The weight of the sentence seemed to fall onto his shoulders. He ran a hand over his face, disoriented. "Do you think that happened because of me?" The elderly man answered without hesitation, "It wasn't about you as a man. It was about what you did. When someone tries to stop a servant from fulfilling what is sacred, the Creator does not let it go unnoticed." Silence settled into the room, dense, almost physical. Ricardo turned toward the window. Outside, Lisbon moved on with its rhythm. Trams passing, tourists walking, vendors chatting. But inside that office, time seemed suspended. He took a deep breath and murmured, "If I admit I was wrong, is what happens to me? My name, my empire, my image?" Imran smiled softly, with a paternal gentleness. "The real test is not about what the world thinks. It's about who you choose to become after seeing such a clear sign." The businessman sat down, resting his elbows on the desk. For the first time, he faced a choice that had nothing to do with money, contracts, or power. It was an inner choice. "And what if I say I don't believe it?" "Believing or not believing doesn't change what happened," Imran replied. "It only changes what will happen to you." The sentence rested on Ricardo like a gentle yet undeniable verdict. That was it. This was the test. To admit the mistake out and let go of pride, or continue hiding behind arrogance and pretend nothing had happened. Each path carried a price. Imran stood up slowly. "I don't hold resentment, but life returns what we give. If you want to correct it, there is still time." Ricardo remained seated, unable to look at the elderly man. His hands trembled. His heart raced. It wasn't fear of the supernatural. It was fear of facing his own conscience. When Imran left the room, closing the door gently behind him, the magnate realized that no one else could decide for him. The whole world could debate videos, mysterious lights and blackouts. But only he knew the truth that was eating him from the inside. That moment in the corridor had not been a coincidence. And now, alone, he needed to choose whether he would keep fighting something far greater than his own pride, or finally surrender to the truth he had always rejected. The week dragged on. Inside the building, no one knew exactly what to expect from the following Friday, the most sensitive day for the Muslim team. There was tension in their eyes, quiet steps through the corridors, and discreet messages exchanged on their phones. Some believed Ricardo would back down. Others feared an even harsher reaction. When the clock approached Jumu'ah time, everyone began heading down to the ground floor hall. The space was wide, with tall windows and natural light falling in thin beams. No one dared leave. No one wanted to challenge the boss, but they didn't want to ignore their faith either. Imran was among them, holding his tasbih hidden in his palm, watching everything with serenity. One of the employees whispered, "Do you think he'll come?" "He'll come," another replied, "and today is the day." A few minutes before the adhan echoed from the Martim Moniz mosque, the elevator door opened. Ricardo stepped out slowly, breathing deeply, his face marked by lack of sleep. He walked to the center of the hall, with dozens of eyes fixed on him. The silence was so deep that even the movement of air through the ceiling vents could be heard. Ricardo raised his hands slightly, asking for attention. "Before the time comes, I need to say something." The team tensed a little. Many feared he would repeat the prohibition. The atmosphere grew heavy, almost suffocating. Then, at the exact moment he opened his mouth to speak, the unexpected happened. The entire building plunged into absolute darkness. A deep thud echoed from the basement. Computers shut down all at once. The digital sign at reception went dark. The corridors turned pitch black. But the hall remained illuminated. The natural light from the windows seemed to intensify, as if the sun had broken through the clouds for that space alone. The employees' faces were clearly visible, bathed in that gentle, unmistakable brightness. Ricardo froze. His eyes widened. His hands began to shake. "No, not again," he murmured, stepping back until he hit the wall. Imran stepped forward, observing everything with a serenity that contrasted sharply with the panic consuming the boss. When a second deep rumble shook the building, Ricardo lost all strength and collapsed to his knees on the marble floor. The sound echoed through the entire hall, sending chills through several employees. His breathing grew short, his eyes filled with tears. He seemed broken. Finally, he lifted his head slowly and looked at the employees who were waiting for the decision he had avoided for so long. "I can't fight this," he said, almost whispering. "From today on, no one will be prevented from praying." The hall remained silent for a few seconds, not because they doubted, but because they knew they were witnessing the moment that changed everything. And as if confirming the words, the power returned suddenly throughout the entire building. The lights flicked back on with a soft snap. The screens rebooted. The automatic doors resumed their motion. But no one looked at the restored electricity. Everyone was looking at the man on the floor, and at the elderly man still standing, peaceful, as if he had always known the outcome would be exactly this. It was the highest point of the entire story. Arrogance, surrendering before something no human authority can control. What happened in the hall did not remain within the building's walls. Before the weekend even arrived, one of the internal recordings reached a staff group, and from there, within minutes, it spread through WhatsApp, TikTok, Instagram, and even Portuguese forums. The story took on unexpected proportions. The video clearly showed the moment Ricardo collapsed, the hall remaining fully illuminated, and the silent panic that hovered while the rest of the building remained in darkness. Within hours, the country's major newsrooms were already discussing the event. SIC opened Jornal da Noite with the headline, "Selective Blackout in Lisbon Building During Conflict Over Religious Freedom." TVI brought in electrical engineering experts, trying to explain how a partial blackout could occur only on certain floors. RTP, in turn, interviewed community leaders about the importance of ensuring the right to salat in the workplace. The subject surpassed religious boundaries and became a national debate about ethics, dignity, and respect. Meanwhile, inside the office, the atmosphere began to shift. Employees from different backgrounds, Portuguese, Mozambicans, Pakistanis, Guineans, started walking through the corridors differently with more ease. It felt as though fear was finally beginning to dissipate. Ricardo, on the other hand, was experiencing intense days. Emails flooded his inbox. Criticism and pressure came from every direction. His image as a powerful businessman was weakened, and he knew he needed to act. So, on a rainy Monday morning, he decided to call a press conference. Cameras, microphones, journalists, all waiting for an answer. The businessman took a deep breath before speaking. "I made a serious mistake. I tried to impose my will where I had no right to interfere. To the employees I hurt, I ask for forgiveness." It was the first time the country had seen him without his usual arrogant posture. Minutes later, the statement began circulating online, shared by people who never imagined they would witness remorse coming from his mouth. Inside the company, Imran watched the video on his phone, surrounded by colleagues. One of them commented, "He finally understood." Imran nodded gently. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain," he said in his calm, characteristic voice, "but it opens the way for change." Those words echoed among everyone nearby. And then came the biggest transformation. The administration sent an internal announcement establishing a permanent space for Salat, a discreet, welcoming room equipped with prayer rugs, water for wudu, and full freedom during the prayer times. The news moved many. Some cried quietly. Others thanked Imran with hugs, though he continued insisting the merit was not his, but the strength of faith that no one can silence. At the end of that day, entering the new prayer space for the first time, one of the employees murmured, "I never thought I'd see this happen in Portugal." And it was true. That room symbolized not just a change within one building, but the beginning of a new understanding of respect in the workplace, a collective impact, born from a moment no one would ever dare forget. The following days brought a silent yet profound transformation to the Lisbon office building. The corridors, once marked by tension and hurried footsteps, began adopting a new rhythm. The environment no longer felt heavy. There was a lightness in the air, as if the structure itself had been relieved of the burden of intolerance. The newly inaugurated prayer room became the symbolic heart of this new chapter. During Salat times, employees from diverse backgrounds, Guineans with bright smiles, shy Pakistanis, talkative Mozambicans, long-time Moroccan residents, and even Portuguese reverts, stood side by side, forming perfectly harmonious rows. There was no distinction of position, nationality, or age. In that space, everyone shared the same purpose. The silence during prayer became a recognizable sound, a dense, respected silence that seemed to purify the surrounding halls. Even those who did not pray felt the impact. They spoke more softly during those minutes, slowed their pace, let the environment breathe. Ricardo, the man who once commanded the opposite, observed everything with a mixture of humility and curiosity. At first, he approached only from the doorway, unsure of how to act. Later, he began participating in community dinners organized in the company cafeteria. There, seated among workers who once feared his presence, he listened to stories about faith, family, migration, and perseverance. He didn't speak much. He listened as someone trying to rebuild something within himself. Sometimes he asked, sincerely, "How do you balance work with spirituality?" And the answers always came simple, yet full of meaning. "We just stop to remember that we're not alone." That sentence stirred something deep inside him. Meanwhile, Imran naturally assumed a special role in the company, without anyone asking. He became an informal counselor for the younger ones. He guided newcomers adapting to life in Portugal, calmed those facing family difficulties, offered advice about patience at work, and always spoke gently, as if every word had to be placed into the world with care. Some colleagues joked, "Imran is better than any therapist." He only smiled. "I just try to remember what I've forgotten many times." The company, once rigid and blind to cultural matters, began implementing clear guidelines for religious diversity. Human Resources started offering cultural training, explanations about faith practices, and an internal guide on how to support employees during prayer times, fasting, and religious celebrations. This change became an example for other companies in the sector, which began asking for advice on inclusive policies. With time, the peace everyone felt stopped being just a sensation. It became routine, a kind of permanent tranquility that moved through the corridors like a familiar visitor. Even the sound of keyboards seemed less harsh. Conversations in the elevators were no longer short and tense. They now included greetings, laughter, small gestures of kindness. Ricardo, although still leading the company, no longer walked with the same air of superiority. The symbolic fall he suffered weeks earlier had broken something, and opened space for a sensitivity no one imagined he had. Every now and then, he crossed paths with Imran and said, "I'm still learning." And the old man replied, "Learning is already a form of prayer." Thus, what began as a painful conflict transformed into harmonious coexistence. An office that once breathed fear now pulsed with humanity. It was the new normal, and no one wanted to go back to what it had been before. At the end of a calm afternoon, golden light passed through the wide windows on the 8th floor, spreading a soft glow across the new prayer room. Imran unrolled the rug with his usual calm, as someone who knows that every gesture carries meaning. Colleagues arrived quietly, forming steady lines, aligning their feet as if that simple act stitched a little more unity into the company each day. The atmosphere seemed suspended for a few moments. The distant sound of the city did not reach that corner. There, slow breaths and attentive hearts were enough to fill the air. Watching that scene, it was impossible not to think about the irony of life. A place that once repressed devotion now embraced a peace built through effort, humility, and the acknowledgement of mistakes. The transformation had not been born from speeches, but from events no engineer could explain, events that marked forever those who witnessed them. The story that spread through Lisbon, of dark corridors and lights appearing where they shouldn't, became more than a curious tale. It became a quiet reminder that human power may be immense for a few minutes, but never greater than what sustains the unseen. Faith, when held sincerely, illuminates paths no lamp can reach. Imran raised his hands, and everyone followed. A moment of stillness filled the space, a moment that said everything without a single word. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and watch the next video, because sometimes what seems like coincidence is simply the world reminding us that there is strength where many least expect it.